The blood on her torn dress had frozen into crimson crystals by the time Eleanor Hawthorne stumbled through the pine trees, her lungs burning with each gasping breath as she heard her stepbrother's voice echoing through the frozen Colorado wilderness behind her. It was December 1876, and the blizzard that had swept down from the mountains 3 days earlier had transformed the landscape into a treacherous white maze, where every direction looked the same, and death waited patiently for those foolish enough to venture far from shelter. Eleanor pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient spruce, her whole body trembling from cold and terror in equal measure. Her thin boots, meant for indoor wear, had soaked through hours ago, and she could no longer feel her toes. The woolen shawl she had grabbed in her desperate flight from the ranch house provided little protection against the brutal wind that sliced through the forest like a knife. She was 18 years old, and she was certain she was going to die out here in these woods, but dying seemed preferable to what waited for her if Marcus caught her. Eleanor. His voice carried through the trees, closer now, too close. You cannot run forever. You are making this harder on yourself, sister dear. She was not his sister, not truly, not in any way that mattered to her heart. Her mother had married his father 2 years ago, a union born of desperation and loneliness after Eleanor's own father had died in a mining accident. The Hawthorne ranch, where her father had worked as foreman, had passed to other hands, and her mother had seen marriage to the wealthy widower Marcus Calloway Sr. as their only path to security. For a while, it had seemed like a reasonable arrangement. The elder Calloway had been kind enough, if distant, and Marcus Jr. had been away at school in the East. But then the elder Calloway had died suddenly last spring, leaving everything to his son, and Marcus had returned to Colorado with dark appetites and a sense of entitlement that made Eleanor's skin crawl. Her mother, weakened by a winter fever, had passed in September, leaving Eleanor alone and vulnerable under Marcus's roof. For 3 months, she had endured his increasingly aggressive advances, his insistence that as step-siblings they could marry and consolidate the family holdings, his refusal to accept her rejections. Yesterday, he had stopped asking. Eleanor touched the bruise on her cheek, wincing at the tenderness. When she had fought him off, he had struck her, and she had seen something break behind his eyes, a final thread of civility snapping. She had fled in the middle of the night, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope that she could reach the town of Silverton, some 15 miles north through the mountain passes. But the storm had disoriented her, and Marcus had discovered her absence sooner than she had hoped. He had been tracking her since dawn, and now, as the weak winter sun began its descent behind the peaks, she knew her strength was failing. A branch snapped somewhere to her left, and she bit back a cry of fear. She pushed away from the tree and ran again, her legs heavy and uncooperative, her vision blurring with exhaustion and cold. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of white and shadow, and she had lost all sense of direction. She might be running in circles for all she knew. She might be running straight back toward the ranch. The ground dropped away suddenly beneath her feet, and she tumbled down a steep embankment, snow and ice cascading around her. She came to rest at the bottom of a ravine, the breath knocked from her lungs, pain radiating from her ribs. For a moment she lay there, unable to move, wondering if this was how it would end. The snow beneath her cheek felt almost warm now, and she knew that was a bad sign. She had heard stories of people freezing to death, how the cold eventually felt like comfort, like sleep. But she was not ready to sleep. Not yet. Eleanor forced herself to her hands and knees, then to her feet, using a bare rock face for support. The ravine stretched in both directions, narrow and deep, offering some protection from the wind but also creating a trap if Marcus found her here. She chose a direction at random and began walking, one hand trailing along the rock wall for balance. She did not know how long she walked. Time had lost meaning, measured only in the rhythm of her footsteps and the ragged sound of her breathing. The ravine began to widen, and she saw something ahead that made her heart leap with desperate hope. Smoke, a thin gray line rising against the darkening sky. Where there was smoke, there was fire. Where there was fire, there were people. Eleanor changed direction, climbing up the side of the ravine with the last reserves of her strength. She crested the edge and saw it, a small cabin nestled in a clearing, smoke rising from a stone chimney. A horse stood in a makeshift shelter beside the cabin, and fresh wood was stacked against the wall. Someone lived here, someone who could help her or at least provide shelter from the killing cold. She staggered toward the cabin, falling twice before she reached the door. She raised her fist to knock, but the door swung open before she could strike wood, and she found herself staring up at a man who seemed to fill the entire doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, and he wore the rough clothing of a frontiersman: buckskin trousers, a heavy wool shirt, and boots that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles. He carried a rifle in one hand, but when he saw her, his expression shifted from wariness to shock. "Please," Eleanor managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Please help me." She felt herself falling, the world tilting sideways, and then strong arms caught her, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. She was aware of warmth enveloping her, of being carried across a threshold, of a fire crackling somewhere nearby. She heard the man's voice, deep and concerned, saying words she could not quite understand through the fog that was closing over her mind. Then darkness took her, and she knew nothing more. When Eleanor opened her eyes again, the first thing she saw was firelight dancing on rough-hewn ceiling beams. She was warm, truly warm, for the first time in what felt like years. She was lying on something soft, covered with heavy blankets that smelled of pine and wood smoke. Her boots had been removed, and she could feel thick socks on her feet that were not her own. "Easy now," a voice said, and she turned her head to see the man from the doorway sitting in a chair a few feet away, watching her with concerned eyes. "You have been out for a few hours. Thought you might not wake up at all the way you were shaking." Eleanor tried to sit up, but her body protested, every muscle aching. The man rose quickly and came to her side, helping her to prop herself against the pillows he had arranged behind her. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse. "I am sorry to impose on you like this." "No imposition," he said. "Cannot leave a person to freeze to death in the woods. That is just not how things are done out here." He stepped back, giving her space. "Name is Samuel Archer. This is my cabin. Who might you be, and what were you doing out in that storm without proper gear?" "Eleanor Hawthorne," she said, and hesitated. How much should she tell this stranger? But something in his eyes, a steadiness and honesty, made her want to trust him. "I was running from someone. My stepbrother. He has been trying to force me into marriage, and when I refused, he became violent. I had to leave." Samuel's expression darkened. "He was chasing you, out here in this weather." "Yes. He may still be looking for me. I am putting you in danger by being here. I should go." She tried to push the blankets aside, but Samuel gently stopped her. "You are not going anywhere in your condition," he said firmly. "Your feet were half frozen when I brought you in. You need rest, food, and warmth in that order. As for danger, I can handle myself just fine. Anyone who would chase a woman into a blizzard with intent to harm her is going to have to answer to me if he shows up at my door." The certainty in his voice made Eleanor feel safe for the first time in months. She sank back against the pillows, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. As if reading her mind, Samuel moved to the fireplace where a pot hung on an iron hook. He ladled something into a wooden bowl and brought it to her, along with a spoon. "Venison stew," he said. "Made it yesterday, should still be good." Eleanor took the bowl with trembling hands and brought a spoonful to her lips. The stew was rich and flavorful, filled with chunks of meat and vegetables, and it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She ate quickly, barely pausing for breath, and when she finished, Samuel refilled the bowl without comment. As she ate her second helping more slowly, she studied him. He had settled back into his chair, giving her space but remaining close enough to help if needed. There was a quietness about him, a self-contained quality that spoke of someone comfortable with solitude. His cabin was small but well kept, with a neatness that surprised her. A single bed stood in one corner, a table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves lined one wall, holding books, supplies, and various tools. Traps and pelts hung from hooks near the door, and she realized he must be a trapper, living out here alone in the wilderness. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. "About 3 years," Samuel said. "Came out here after the war, needed some quiet, some space to think. Found this spot and built the cabin. It suits me." "The war," Eleanor said. "The war between the states," he nodded. "I was with the Union Army. Colorado Volunteers, then regular Army after we mustered in. Saw more than I cared to see, did things I am still not proud of. When it was over, I could not go back to settled life. Too much noise, too many people, so I came up here into the mountains and made a different life." Eleanor understood that kind of need for escape, the desire to leave behind a painful past. "Do you ever regret it, living alone out here?" Samuel considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Winters can be long and lonely, but I have my books, my work, and the land itself for company. It has been enough, until now." He looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Until I opened my door and found you on my threshold, half frozen and running for your life." There was something in the way he said it that made Eleanor's breath catch. She set the empty bowl aside, suddenly very aware of how she must look with her hair wild and tangled, her dress torn and stained. But Samuel was not looking at her with judgment or pity. He was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "Tell me about your stepbrother," he said. "If he is still out there looking for you, I need to know what we might be dealing with." Eleanor took a shaky breath and told him everything. She told him about her mother's marriage to Marcus's father, about the elder Calloway's unexpected death, about Marcus's return and his increasing obsession with her. She told him about the months of unwanted attention, the threats disguised as proposals, the way he had made it clear that she had nowhere else to go and no one who would help her. She told him about the night before, how Marcus had cornered her in her room, how he had grabbed her and struck her when she fought back, how she had escaped through a window and run into the storm. By the time she finished, Samuel's hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight with anger. "He has no legal claim on you," Samuel said. "Even as your stepbrother, he cannot force you into marriage. The law would not support him." "The law is far away," Eleanor said bitterly. "Marcus owns most of the land around his ranch. He employs half the men in the county. Who would stand against him? Who would believe me over him?" She felt tears burning in her eyes and blinked them back angrily. "I have no family, no money, no one to protect me. Running was my only choice." Samuel leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You have someone now," he said quietly. "You have me. I will not let him take you back, Eleanor. I swear it on everything I hold sacred." The sincerity in his voice brought the tears she had been holding back, and they spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by exhaustion and relief, and a dozen other emotions she could not name. She felt the mattress shift as Samuel sat beside her, and then his arms were around her, pulling her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head. "It is all right," he murmured. "You are safe here. I will not let anyone hurt you again." Eleanor clung to him, sobbing into his shirt, letting out all the fear and pain she had been carrying for so long. Samuel held her through it all, his embrace steady and sure, asking nothing of her, simply offering comfort. Gradually her tears subsided, and she became aware of the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, the way his hand moved gently through her hair. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him, and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was concern there and tenderness, but also something deeper, something that sent heat spreading through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not need to thank me," Samuel said. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away the last of her tears. "You were brave to run, brave to keep going even when you thought you might die. That takes strength, Eleanor." No one had ever called her brave before. She had always been seen as quiet, obedient, the girl who did what she was told. But Samuel saw something different in her, and she wanted to be worthy of that vision. "I should let you rest," Samuel said, though he seemed reluctant to move away. "You have been through an ordeal. You need sleep." "Where will you sleep?" Eleanor asked, suddenly realizing that there was only one bed in the cabin. "I will take the floor by the fire," Samuel said. "I have slept in worse places, believe me." "I cannot take your bed," Eleanor protested. "You can and you will," Samuel said firmly. "I will hear no arguments on this matter. You are my guest, and you need proper rest to recover." There was no point in arguing with him, Eleanor realized. He had a stubborn set to his jaw that told her he would not be moved on this issue. She nodded, settling back under the blankets, and watched as he gathered extra furs and made himself a comfortable-looking pallet near the fireplace. "Samuel," she said softly. He looked up at her, the firelight catching in his eyes. "I am glad I found your cabin. I am glad it was you who opened the door." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features from stern to almost boyish. "So am I, Eleanor, so am I." She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally claiming her, and fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling and the quiet movements of the man who had saved her life. Eleanor woke to pale sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the smell of coffee brewing. She sat up slowly, her body still aching but feeling more human than she had the night before. Samuel stood at the fireplace, cooking something in a large pan, and he turned when he heard her stirring. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Eleanor said honestly. "Sore, but better." She swung her legs out of bed, testing her feet. They were tender, but the thick socks Samuel had given her provided cushioning. She stood carefully, steadying herself against the bedpost. "Your dress is beyond saving, I am afraid," Samuel said, nodding toward a chair where her torn and stained garment lay folded. "But I have some old clothes that might fit you. Belonged to my younger brother before he moved to California. He was slighter built than me, so they might work." He pulled a bundle of clothes from a chest and handed them to her. A pair of woolen trousers, a soft flannel shirt, and a leather vest. Eleanor took them gratefully, and Samuel turned his back, busying himself with breakfast while she changed behind a blanket he had strung up in the corner for privacy. The clothes were too large, but not impossibly so. She rolled up the cuffs of the trousers and tightened the vest as much as she could, and when she emerged from behind the blanket, Samuel turned and grinned. "You make a fine frontiersman," he said. Eleanor felt herself blush. "I must look ridiculous." "You look practical," Samuel corrected. "And warm, which is what matters." "Come, sit. Breakfast is ready." He had made bacon and johnnycakes, and they ate together at the small table, the morning light growing stronger as they talked. Samuel told her about his life in the mountains, about trapping beaver and marten, about the cycles of the seasons and the ways of surviving in the wilderness. Eleanor found herself fascinated by the details, by the self-sufficiency and skill required to live this way. "You ever go into town?" she asked. "Once or twice a year," Samuel said, "usually in the spring and fall. I trade my pelts for supplies, pick up any news, then come back here. Towns make me nervous now. Too many people, too much commotion." "What about now?" Eleanor asked quietly. "What happens when this storm clears?" "Marcus will still be looking for me. I cannot hide in your cabin forever." Samuel set down his coffee cup, his expression serious. "We have some time to figure that out. Storm is not done yet. I can read the sky, and there is more snow coming. Nobody is going anywhere for at least a few more days." As if to confirm his words, the wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. Eleanor felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. She was safe here, warm and fed, but it was a temporary reprieve. Eventually she would have to face the world again, and Marcus would still be waiting. "I have been thinking," Samuel said. "Your stepbrother has no legal claim on you, as I said last night, but if you were married to someone else, he would have no choice but to leave you alone. A husband's claim would supersede any family connection." Eleanor stared at him. "Are you suggesting I marry someone who— I know no one in this territory except Marcus and his associates." Samuel met her gaze steadily. "You know me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor's heart began to pound. "You are proposing marriage to me. We just met." "I know it is sudden," Samuel said. "I know it is not the way these things are usually done, but we are not living in usual circumstances. You need protection, legal protection that will keep Marcus from claiming any rights over you. I can provide that." "That is a terrible reason to marry someone," Eleanor said, though her voice was shaking. "It is a practical reason," Samuel said, "but not the only reason." He reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and sure. "Eleanor, I opened my door yesterday and saw you standing there, brave and desperate and more beautiful than anyone I have ever seen, and something in my chest just shifted. I know we barely know each other. I know this is fast, but I also know that I want to help you. I want to keep you safe. And if I am being completely honest, I want to know you better. I want to see where this could go between us." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, her mind racing. This was insane. She could not marry a man she had known for less than a day. But what other choice did she have? Marcus would never stop hunting her. If she tried to reach town alone, he would find her. She had no money, no prospects, nowhere else to go. Samuel was offering her safety, protection, and the chance at a new life. And if she was being honest with herself, there was more to consider than just practicality. There was the way her heart had fluttered when Samuel held her last night, the way his smile made her feel warm inside, the way she felt safe in his presence, not just physically but in some deeper way she could not quite articulate. "This is crazy," she said softly. "Probably," Samuel agreed. "But sometimes the crazy choices are the right ones." Eleanor took a deep breath. "If we did this, it would be a real marriage, not just a legal arrangement." Samuel's eyes darkened with something that made her pulse quicken. "If you wanted it to be real, then yes. I would be a true husband to you in every way, but I would never force you, Eleanor. We could take things slowly, get to know each other properly. The marriage would give you protection immediately, but everything else could happen in its own time." The fact that he was giving her that choice, that he was not demanding anything from her, made Eleanor's decision easier. Marcus had tried to take everything from her by force. Samuel was offering her a choice, a partnership, a chance to build something on her own terms. "All right," she said, and saw shock flash across Samuel's face, as though he had not really expected her to agree. "I will marry you, Samuel Archer." A slow smile spread across his face, and he squeezed her hand gently. "You will not regret this, Eleanor. I swear to you, I will do everything in my power to make you happy." "How do we even arrange a marriage out here?" Eleanor asked. "There is no church, no minister." "There is a circuit preacher who comes through these mountains," Samuel said. "Reverend Thompson. He is due to pass through the valley about 10 miles from here in the next week or so, making his winter rounds to the homesteads. If the weather clears, we can ride out to meet him. Until then, we have time to prepare. Time for you to be sure about this decision." The next few days passed in a strange, suspended kind of peace. The storm did return, as Samuel had predicted, dumping another 2 feet of snow on the mountains and making travel impossible. Eleanor and Samuel were trapped in the cabin together, but it did not feel like a trap. Instead, it felt like a gift, a bubble of time removed from the outside world where they could simply be together and learn about each other. Samuel taught her how to card wool and mend clothing, skills she would need to survive in the wilderness. Eleanor, in turn, shared stories from her childhood, about her father who had been a dreamer and a storyteller, about her mother who had loved music and taught Eleanor to sing. They played cards in the evenings, simple games that usually ended with both of them laughing. They read aloud to each other from Samuel's collection of books, everything from Shakespeare to tales of exploration. Eleanor discovered that Samuel was not the grim, solitary figure she might have expected from a man who lived alone in the mountains. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. He was patient and kind, never pushing her, never making demands. When they sat together by the fire in the evenings, he would sometimes take her hand, and she found herself looking forward to that simple touch, to the warmth of his palm against hers. On the 4th day, the weather finally cleared, revealing a world transformed by snow. The sun shone brilliantly on the white landscape, and Samuel declared it safe enough to venture out. "We need to go to the valley today," he said. "If the preacher is there, we should take advantage of it. Are you still certain about this, Eleanor?" She looked at him, at this man who had taken her in without question, who had offered her safety and respect and the beginnings of something that felt like it could become love, and she nodded. "I am certain." They saddled Samuel's horse, a sturdy mare named Gypsy, and rode together through the snowy forest. Samuel sat behind her, his arms around her waist to keep her secure, and Eleanor leaned back against his chest, feeling safe and protected. The journey took several hours, following narrow trails that Samuel navigated with practiced ease. They arrived at a small cluster of cabins in the valley just as the sun was reaching its zenith. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and Eleanor could see people moving about between the buildings. Samuel guided Gypsy to the largest cabin, where a painted sign declared it to be both a trading post and a meeting house. Inside, they found a dozen or so people gathered around a central stove, including a thin man with a kind face who wore a minister's collar. "Samuel Archer," the minister said, rising to greet them. "It has been an age since I saw you last. What brings you down from your mountain?" "Hello, Reverend Thompson," Samuel said. "I have come to ask you to perform a marriage. This is Eleanor Hawthorne, my intended bride." The announcement caused a stir among the assembled people, who stared at Eleanor with open curiosity. She felt herself flush under their scrutiny, suddenly aware of how strange they must look, this hermit trapper and the woman in men's clothing asking to be wed. Reverend Thompson's eyes were shrewd but kind. "This is quite sudden, Samuel. I did not even know you were courting anyone." "It is a recent development," Samuel said, "but we are both quite certain of our decision. Will you marry us, Reverend?" The minister studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "If you are both of age and entering into this of your own free will, then I see no reason to refuse. Do you have witnesses?" Two of the homesteaders, a married couple named John and Martha Peterson, agreed to stand as witnesses. Reverend Thompson asked Eleanor and Samuel to stand before him, and the small crowd gathered around as he opened his Bible. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. Eleanor found herself trembling as she repeated the vows, promising to love and honor this man who was still so new to her. When Samuel spoke his vows, his voice was clear and strong, his eyes never leaving her face. He looked at her like she was the only person in the world, like she was precious beyond measure. "You have a ring?" Reverend Thompson asked. Samuel shook his head regretfully. "I did not have time to acquire one." "That is all right," Eleanor said quickly. "We do not need a ring." But Martha Peterson stepped forward, pulling a simple band of silver from her own finger. "Take mine," she said. "I have others. Every bride should have a ring on her wedding day." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. Samuel took the ring and slid it onto her finger, his touch gentle. It was slightly too large, but it felt right somehow, this borrowed symbol of their unexpected union. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson said. "Samuel, you may kiss your bride." Samuel cupped Eleanor's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and kissed her softly. It was a gentle kiss, almost chaste, but it sent heat racing through Eleanor's entire body. When he pulled back, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. The homesteaders congratulated them, and Martha insisted they stay for a meal. Over stew and bread, Eleanor listened as Samuel explained to the curious neighbors that his new wife had been fleeing an abusive situation and would be living with him on his mountain. He spoke matter-of-factly, daring anyone to question or judge, and the other settlers seemed to accept the story without much comment. Life was hard in these mountains, and people learned not to pry too deeply into others' business. As they prepared to leave, John Peterson pulled Samuel aside. Eleanor could not hear what was said, but she saw Samuel's expression darken, saw him nod grimly. When he returned to her, he placed a protective hand on her back. "What is it?" Eleanor asked as they mounted Gypsy. "John says a man came through here 2 days ago, asking about a woman matching your description. Said she was his sister, and he was worried about her, that she had run off in a confused state after a fever. He offered a reward for information about her whereabouts." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Marcus, he is still searching." "But he does not know where you are," Samuel said firmly. "And even if he finds us, you are my wife now. He has no legal claim on you anymore. You are protected, Eleanor, I promise you that." They rode back to the cabin as the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Eleanor was quiet, processing everything that had happened. She was married now, to a man she had known for less than a week. It should have felt wrong or frightening or surreal. Instead, it felt like coming home. When they reached the cabin, Samuel helped her down from the horse and took her hands in his. "Are you all right? I know today was a lot." "I am all right," Eleanor said. "Better than all right, actually. I am married to a good man who has been nothing but kind to me. That is more than I dared to hope for when I was running through those woods." Samuel smiled and kissed her forehead gently. "I need to tend to Gypsy. Why do not you go inside and warm up? I will be in shortly." Eleanor entered the cabin, lit the lamps, and built up the fire. She looked around the small space with new eyes. This was her home now. This was where she would build her new life. It was not what she had imagined for herself, but standing here in the warm glow of the firelight, she found she did not mind. When Samuel came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, he found her standing by the fire, still wearing his brother's two large clothes, and he stopped in the doorway just to look at her. "What?" Eleanor asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You look right here," Samuel said simply. "Like you belong." He crossed the room to her, and this time when he pulled her into his arms, there was nothing hesitant about it. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, and Eleanor felt herself melting into him, her arms winding around his neck. This was her husband, she realized. She was allowed to want him. She was allowed to kiss him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably talk about sleeping arrangements," he said. "You are my wife now, but I meant what I said about taking things slowly. I do not want to rush you into anything you are not ready for." Eleanor looked up at him, at this man who had saved her life and offered her safety, and was now giving her the choice about the pace of their intimacy. And she felt her heart expand with something that might already be love. "I do not want to wait," she said softly. "I want to be your wife in truth, Samuel, tonight." His eyes darkened with desire, but he still hesitated. "Eleanor, you have been through so much. I do not want you to feel obligated." "I do not feel obligated," Eleanor said firmly. "I feel safe, and I feel like I want to be close to you." "Is that so wrong?" "Not wrong at all," Samuel said, and swept her up into his arms, carrying her to the bed. He laid her down gently and stretched out beside her, his hand cupping her face. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Eleanor whispered, and pulled him down to kiss her again. What followed was tender and sweet, and everything Eleanor had never known intimacy could be. Samuel was patient and gentle, constantly checking to make sure she was all right, making sure she wanted to continue. There was no force, no demands, just two people learning each other's bodies and creating something beautiful together. When it was over, Eleanor lay curled against Samuel's chest, feeling cherished and whole in a way she had never experienced before. "I think I am falling in love with you," she whispered into the darkness. Samuel's arms tightened around her. "I know I am falling in love with you," he replied. "Maybe I started falling the moment I opened that door and saw you standing there." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in months, Eleanor did not have nightmares. The next 2 weeks passed in a kind of blissful honeymoon period. Eleanor learned the rhythms of life in the mountains, the daily tasks that kept them fed and warm. Samuel taught her to shoot, patient as she learned to handle the rifle, and she discovered she had a good eye. She learned to set snares for rabbits and how to skin and prepare small game. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Samuel would work on repairing traps while Eleanor read aloud or worked on mending their clothes. They made love often, discovering each other with a passion that surprised them both. Samuel was an attentive lover, always focused on her pleasure as much as his own, and Eleanor found herself becoming bolder, more confident in expressing what she wanted. The physical intimacy deepened the emotional bond between them, and Eleanor realized that what had started as a marriage of convenience had become something real and precious. But the outside world could not be held at bay forever. 3 weeks after their wedding, Samuel returned from checking his trap lines with a grim expression. "What is wrong?" Eleanor asked immediately. "Someone has been through here," Samuel said. "I found tracks near the eastern ridge, boot prints fresh from this morning." "Someone is searching the area." Eleanor felt fear clench her stomach. "Marcus." "Probably," Samuel agreed. "He is persistent, I will give him that. But he is also a fool if he thinks he can track through these mountains without proper experience. The tracks wandered in circles. He is lost." "What if he finds the cabin?" "Then he finds the cabin," Samuel said calmly. and he discovers that you are a married woman and no longer his concern, I will not hide from him, Eleanor, and neither should you. You have done nothing wrong." But despite his confident words, Samuel kept the rifle close at hand for the rest of the day. As evening fell, they heard it, the sound of a horse approaching through the trees. Samuel positioned himself by the window, rifle ready, while Eleanor stood behind him, her heart pounding. A man on horseback emerged from the tree line, and Eleanor recognized him immediately. Marcus Calloway looked worse for wear after weeks in the mountains. His face was gaunt and frostbitten, his expensive coat torn and stained. But his eyes, when they fixed on the cabin, burned with a fanatical intensity that made Eleanor's blood run cold. Samuel stepped out onto the small porch, rifle held casually but ready. "That is far enough," he called. "State your business." Marcus dismounted, his hand moving toward the pistol at his hip. "My business is with Eleanor Hawthorne. I know she is in there. Send her out." "Eleanor Archer is my wife," Samuel said coldly, "and she is going nowhere with you." "Your wife," Marcus laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Do not be ridiculous. She belongs to me. Her mother married my father, making her part of my family. She is my responsibility." "She is a grown woman who makes her own choices," Samuel said, "and her choice is to be here with me. You need to accept that and move on." "I will not accept it," Marcus shouted, his composure cracking. "She is mine. I have searched for weeks, nearly froze to death in these cursed mountains, all to bring her home. She owes me." Eleanor stepped out onto the porch, standing beside Samuel despite his attempt to keep her behind him. "I owe you nothing, Marcus. I never wanted your attention. I never wanted to marry you. You need to let this go." Marcus stared at her, and something ugly twisted his features. "You stupid girl. Do you know what I have sacrificed for you? What I have endured? And you throw it all back in my face for some mountain hermit." "This mountain hermit treats me with respect," Eleanor said quietly. "He does not hit me. He does not force himself on me. He sees me as a person, not property. That is more than you ever did." "Respect," Marcus spat. "I will show you respect." His hand moved toward his gun. Samuel's rifle came up in one smooth motion, the barrel aimed directly at Marcus's chest. "Do not," Samuel said, his voice deadly calm. "I am a better shot than you, and I have more experience with violence. You will lose this confrontation. Walk away while you still can." For a long, tense moment, the three of them stood frozen in a deadly tableau. Then Marcus's hand slowly moved away from his weapon. "This is not over," he said, but there was defeat in his voice now. "I will go to the authorities. I will tell them you kidnapped her." "You do that," Samuel said. "And I will tell them about the bruises you left on her face, about how you chased her into a blizzard with intent to harm her. I have witnesses who saw her condition when I found her. Who do you think they will believe?" Marcus's face contorted with rage and frustration, but he had no response. He mounted his horse with jerky, aggressive movements. "You will regret this, Eleanor," he said. "Both of you will regret this." He wheeled his horse around and rode back into the trees. Samuel kept the rifle trained on him until he disappeared from sight, then waited several more minutes before finally lowering the weapon. "He is gone," Samuel said, though tension still thrummed through his body. "But he may come back." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "He will not. You humiliated him just now, made him face the fact that he has no power over me anymore. He is too proud to come back after that. He will go home and tell himself he is well rid of me, that I was not worth the trouble. He will move on." Samuel turned to her, studying her face. "You sound very certain." "I know him," Eleanor said. "I know how his mind works. He cannot stand to lose, so he will rewrite the story in his head until he is the victor. But he will not come back here. It is truly over." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I was afraid," he admitted. When he reached for his gun, I was afraid I would have to kill him and that you would hate me for it. I could never hate you, Eleanor said fiercely. You protected me. You gave me the courage to stand up to him. I am not afraid anymore, Samuel. For the first time in so long, I am not afraid. They went back inside, and Samuel bolted the door securely. They barely slept that night, both of them listening for sounds of Marcus's return, but the forest remained quiet. By morning, fresh snow had fallen, covering any tracks, and Samuel pronounced it safe. He is gone, he said. Back to whatever hole he crawled out of. We are free, Eleanor, truly free. And they were. The weeks turned into months, winter giving way to spring, and there was no further sign of Marcus Calloway. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor grew stronger, more capable, learning all the skills she needed to thrive in the mountain wilderness. She discovered she had a talent for gardening and started planning an ambitious vegetable garden for the summer. She learned to fish in the icy streams and to preserve meat for the winter months. But more than the practical skills, she learned what it meant to be loved and to love in return. Samuel was everything a husband should be, protective but not controlling, supportive but not overbearing. He encouraged her to pursue her own interests, to develop her own strengths. He made her laugh every day and held her every night. The marriage that had begun as a desperate arrangement had become the greatest joy of Eleanor's life. In late spring, Eleanor began to suspect that their family was about to grow. She missed her monthly courses, and certain smells began to make her nauseous. When she finally worked up the courage to tell Samuel, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. "A baby," he said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel said. "Eleanor, you have given me everything. You brought life and love back into my world, and now you are giving me a child. I am the most blessed man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Eleanor bloomed with health, her body rounding with new life. Samuel fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, eat more, take it easy. Eleanor tolerated his overprotectiveness with good humor, knowing it came from a place of love. As winter approached again, Samuel made preparations to take Eleanor down to the valley, to the small cluster of homesteads where there was a woman experienced in midwifery. "I am not taking any chances," he said firmly, when Eleanor protested that she would be fine having the baby in the cabin. "You and this child are too precious to me. We are going where there is proper help." They spent the last months of Eleanor's pregnancy in a small cabin. John and Martha Peterson had offered them. And it was there, on a cold January morning in 1878, that Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Samuel feared he would lose her, but Eleanor proved as strong as he had always known she was. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in his arms, Samuel wept with relief and joy. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked, exhausted but smiling as she held their son for the first time. "What about Daniel?" Samuel suggested. "After my father, Daniel Archer." "Daniel," Eleanor repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the world, little one." They stayed in the valley through the worst of the winter, giving Eleanor time to recover and the baby time to grow stronger. In the spring, they returned to their mountain cabin, now a family of 3. Life was different with a baby, busier and more chaotic, but also richer. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, spending hours playing with Daniel, singing to him, carrying him in a sling while he checked his trap lines. Eleanor watched her husband with their son and felt her heart expand even further with love. This was the life she had been meant for, she realized. not as Marcus's unwilling bride in a ranch house full of unhappy memories, but here in these mountains with a man who loved her truly and a child they had created together. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Daniel grew into a curious, adventurous little boy who loved exploring the forest with his father. When he was 3, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, and 2 years after that, another son they called Matthew. The cabin grew too small for their expanding family, and Samuel spent a summer building an addition, creating more space for his growing brood. Eleanor sometimes thought about her old life, about her mother and the ranch and the girl she had been when she ran into those frozen woods. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like a story that had happened to someone else. She had been so afraid back then, so certain she was going to die in that blizzard. She could never have imagined that her desperate flight would lead her to this. A loving husband, 3 healthy children, and a life full of purpose and joy. One evening, when Daniel was 7 and already talking about becoming a trapper like his father, Eleanor and Samuel sat together on the porch they had built, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed but actually giggling and playing, their laughter drifting through the open door. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked, taking Eleanor's hand. "Marrying me on such short acquaintance? Making your life out here in the wilderness instead of in civilization?" Eleanor looked at him, at the silver just beginning to show in his hair, at the lines around his eyes from years of smiling, at the face she loved more than any other in the world. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You saved my life in more ways than one, Samuel Archer. You gave me safety, love, a home, and a family. How could I ever regret that?" Samuel raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I am the one who was saved," he said. "I was half alive up here, just going through the motions of existence. Then you came into my life, and suddenly everything had color and meaning again. You saved me just as much as I saved you." "Then we saved each other," Eleanor said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That seems fair." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the peaks and the first stars began to appear. Inside, the children's voices finally quieted, and Samuel stood, pulling Eleanor to her feet. "Come on, Mrs. Archer," he said. "Let us go tuck in our children and then enjoy some time to ourselves." Eleanor followed him inside, closing the door on the darkening world, sealing them all safely in the warm glow of home. She looked around at the life they had built together. The comfortable furniture Samuel had made with his own hands, the shelves full of books and treasures the children had collected, the toys scattered across the floor, the photographs on the walls documenting their growing family. This was her life now. This was her home. And it was more than she had ever dared to dream of when she was running through those frozen woods, terrified and alone. After tucking the children into bed and reading them a story, Eleanor and Samuel retreated to their own room. Samuel pulled her into his arms and she went willingly, fitting against him as perfectly as she had that very first night. "I love you," Samuel murmured against her hair. "More today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too," Eleanor replied, "always and forever." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease of long familiarity, but also with the passion that had never faded between them. Afterward, as Eleanor drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided her to Samuel's door that frozen night so many years ago. The children grew, as children do. Daniel became a skilled tracker and hunter, learning everything his father could teach him. Sarah proved to have a gift for healing, studying the medicinal plants that grew in the mountains and helping the other homesteaders when illness struck. Matthew, the youngest, had his mother's love of stories and spent hours reading everything he could get his hands on, talking about becoming a schoolteacher someday. Eleanor and Samuel watched their children develop into capable, kind adults with pride and love. They remained as devoted to each other as they had been in those early days, their bond deepening with each passing year. They weathered hardships together, harsh winters, illness, the occasional injury. But they also celebrated joys, first steps and first words, birthdays and holidays, the simple pleasure of being together. When Daniel turned 20, he married a girl from the valley, a sweet-natured young woman named Catherine who fit into the Archer family as though she had always belonged. They built a cabin not far from Samuel and Eleanor's, and soon Eleanor became a grandmother, marveling at the tiny infant who bore such a striking resemblance to Samuel. Sarah married at 22, choosing a young doctor who had come west to practice medicine in the growing settlements. They moved to a town about 50 miles away, but they visited often, and Sarah brought her new medical knowledge with her, teaching Eleanor techniques for treating common ailments. Matthew did indeed become a teacher, taking a position at the school in Silverton, the very town Eleanor had been trying to reach that long-ago night when she stumbled into Samuel's life. He boarded during the school year but came home every summer, filling the cabin with his laughter and stories of his students. The years continued to pass, and Eleanor and Samuel grew older together, their hair turning silver, their movements slower but no less purposeful. They spent their days working side by side, maintaining their home and helping their children and grandchildren. They spent their evenings on the porch Samuel had built, holding hands and watching the sun set behind the mountains they loved. One evening, when Eleanor was 62 and Samuel 65, he turned to her with a smile. "You remember the night we met?" he asked. "The night you came stumbling out of that blizzard. How could I forget?" Eleanor said. "It was the worst night of my life and the best night of my life, all at once. I knew the moment I saw you that you were going to change everything," Samuel said. "I just had no idea how much. You brought me back to life, Eleanor. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." "We gave each other everything," Eleanor corrected gently. "That is what love does. It completes us." Samuel pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and pine and home. "I would do it all again," Samuel said. "Every moment, every choice, every challenge, just to end up here with you." "So would I," Eleanor whispered. "So would I." They sat there as the stars came out, surrounded by the mountains that had witnessed their love story, held safe in the life they had built together. The frozen woods that had once threatened Eleanor's life had led her to this. Decades of love, laughter, family, and joy. The cowboy who had found her hiding in the snow had become her husband, her partner, her everything. It was more than a happy ending. It was a happy lifetime. And when they were old and gray, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Eleanor and Samuel would sit on that same porch, holding hands as they had always done, and tell the story of how they met. They would talk about the blizzard, and the desperate flight and the cabin door that had opened to reveal salvation. They would talk about the hasty wedding and the challenges they had faced, and the love that had grown stronger with every passing year. Their descendants would listen, wide-eyed, marveling at the romance and adventure of it all. And Eleanor and Samuel would smile at each other, sharing a look that said more than words ever could, a look that spoke of shared history and abiding love, and the quiet contentment of two souls who had found their perfect match. The mountains had witnessed their beginning, and the mountains would witness their ending whenever that time came. But for now, for this moment, they were here together, and that was enough. That was everything. Eleanor and Samuel lived out their days in the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, held safe in a love that had begun in desperation, but had blossomed into something rare and precious and eternal. They had saved each other in that frozen wilderness all those years ago, and they continued saving each other every single day for the rest of their lives. And if the mountains could speak, they would tell of the woman who ran through frozen woods seeking freedom, and the cowboy who found her and offered her not just shelter but a home. They would tell of love that grew from unlikely beginnings, of family born from hope, of two people who chose each other again and again, day after day, year after year. It was a story worthy of the wild frontier, of the untamed West where people carved lives from harsh landscapes and found beauty in unexpected places. It was a story of survival and strength, of courage and compassion, but most of all, it was a story of love, and it was true.